Welcome to the Solo Mo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is August 14th, 2012, and this is episode number 32.
In this gold medal episode, we're going to discuss the Olympics, Storify, open Pinterest registration and iPad app, checking into Facebook with your face, daily Oreo images, and more.
I like gold medal episode. I think we might have just found a title for this one.
My writing skills aren't too shabby, but
I'll give that title a gold medal.
How's it going, man?
It's going well. It's going well. Wrapping up a little 2-week-long Olympic sprint. I definitely watched more TV in the past 2 weeks, I think, than I've watched in the past 2 months combined. There was definitely a lot of watching the Olympics. I always like, there's certain events that I really enjoy, especially some of the track stuff, some of the swimming things, and then some of the random ones like the 10-meter platform dive and the kind of more crazy Olympic sports. So what about yourself, Adam? What's your favorite Olympic sport?
I don't know what my favorite is. I think there were some this year that I don't remember watching last year, and I kept watching it this time kind of going, when was the first time that somebody created this event? Who would have put something like rhythmic gymnastics into here? Or who would have thought diving with one person isn't enough? Let's try synchronized diving. I just couldn't comprehend, and it has me wanting to go into Wikipedia or something and check out what are the origins of some of these events.
That's funny because we started looking at Wikipedia for how did some of these events come to be, and a lot of the stories are sort of, I don't know, they don't tell it very well. There isn't a lot of history, I guess, documented about how the sports evolved, because sometimes they'll have when it first made it into the Olympics, but they don't talk about what it was before or how it was played when it first came into the Olympics, because a lot of these things have evolved over the years and rules have changed and the way that people participate and train for it has changed. So there was sort of a void in Olympic history.
You should have seen BMX 100 years ago. It was completely different, actually.
Yeah, the square wheels made it a totally different sport.
So what is your favorite sport then?
Oh, man, if I had to pick one, that's a toughie. I'm going to go with the 100-meter dash. It's, me and everybody else in the world, but there's something about how fast it is and how narrow the margin of victories are that really, I love watching that. You get nervous just watching it because if you blink, that's half of the race. So, but I think that's a fun one to watch.
That's like swimming, right? I mean, swimming this year, I was just thinking, you say you're the gold medalist, but really you're the gold medalist because I think, who was it? Phelps was saying something about maybe this was actually a replay of Beijing when he won, that had he cut his fingernails that he might have lost because of reaching out and just touching it just before the folks next to him.
Yeah, and there was actually some interesting things about, this year they don't actually use a real gun anymore. They use this thing that basically just triggers an audio sound behind each athlete, because they found that if you shot a gun from one side of the track, the athletes furthest from that gunshot were actually at a disadvantage, especially when races are measured in thousandths of a second. They were getting that gunshot, 0.04 seconds after the person closest to the gunshot. And when that's the difference between winning and losing, that was actually putting people at a significant disadvantage. So they've had to change the way that they actually start races to account for how close they are now, which is just pretty crazy to think about.
So there were a lot of technological innovations regarding how they did things, from timing to even cameras when they were following folks down diving, from the top of the board all the way into the water. But today we're going to actually talk about how social media and the internet and so on had an impact on the Olympic Games, right?
Indeed, because this was, by far the most social games. And we'll actually look at some of those stats where comparing last summer Olympic Games to this Olympic Games, just the drastic increase in social media in general. I think that 4 years ago, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but in terms of social media's history, it's massive amounts of growth. And, I think it's almost surprising to look back and just think about how different the world was just 4 years years ago, and then imagine 4 years from now what it's going to look like. And so, as you said, this is going to be, we don't want to spend the whole time just talking about what our favorite sports are. So we're going to get into the good stuff and talk about some of the technology and some of the social media that was really driving this games and driving the way that people experienced it. And the first of those was Twitter. So Twitter is always quick to jump on the stats. They're very good about this. They love talking about some of these very interesting stats that come out of the Olympics. And so they put together a blog post called Olympic and Twitter Records because, as is often the case, big events create big records for Twitter because they just have more users. So more users equal more tweets per minute. They're constantly breaking their own records. But the Olympics, of course, being kind of the event that the world comes together and watches, was an event that played out extremely well on Twitter. People were watching the events. They were talking about it. They were talking about the ceremonies. They were talking about the live event. And then, hours later when NBC finally decided to air it in the United States, they were talking about it then, and interesting comparisons between those two things. So, Adam, do we want to go through some of these Olympic records and maybe just talk about what stood out?
Sure. I think it's interesting to see what people around the world were most interested in. Twitter calls out a few of what they call their TPMs, their tweet per minute records. They have Usain Bolt of Jamaica winning gold in the 200-meter sprint, 80,000 tweets per minute, which is quite high in comparison to a lot of other things that happen on Twitter.
Well, that had to be like the most popular thing that happened all the Olympics, right? It's like the world's greatest athlete competing in the world's greatest event. That had to be the thing that got people buzzing most of all, right?
I think so. Yes, it was.
Actually, that was a trick question because it was not.
I'm looking at the numbers right here.
It's hidden down in the post because I think they almost didn't want to talk about this. The number one most tweeted about thing during the Olympics was when the Spice Girls reemerged during the closing ceremony. They had 116,000 tweets per minute. So Usain Bolt, world's fastest man, gets 80,000 tweets per minute. The Spice Girls get 116,000. They literally destroyed Usain Bolt in the, race for Twitter tweets per minute, which I thought was kind of funny.
Yeah, and which kind of in a way echoes a lot of the tweets per minute records of the past that are not necessarily Olympics related, where we have these big news events like Osama bin Laden being killed, and I'm trying to remember some of the other ones that they had, Michael Jackson dying and things. And then suddenly they'll have like Flying Castle is on TV in China or Japan or something like that. And it just blows away the tweets per minute record, which is quite interesting to see the contrast and what gets people going on there. But yes, you got me. They didn't have it here. They buried that a bit down in the post. But Usain actually was on here twice. So he also generated 74,000 tweets per minute when he won the 100-meter sprint, which I believe is what he did before the 200-meter. I don't remember. I think that was the order that he had done it in. And Andy Murray winning the gold of Great Britain. That was a big thing for Great Britain, the pride of him winning. And I believe he had actually lost Wimbledon or something like that to the same person that he played in the finals. So that was kind of a big deal for folks at 57,000 tweets per minute. Jamaica, this is again Usain Bolt as part of the Jamaican team doing the relay, the 4x100 relay at 52,000 tweets per minute, and Team USA beating Spain in men's basketball. Like we thought that wasn't going to happen, but that was 41,000 tweets per minute. And then just some of the winners in regards to the athletes specifically. Of course, it sounds like Usain Bolt, Michael Phelps was number 2, Tom Daley. Trying to remember Tom Daley. I think he's a diver. Is he a diver? Or is he one of the American swim team?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I wasn't that deep into watching each one of the sports. But I think what was interesting about those numbers was that actually 9 athletes had more than 1 million tweets about them. So it was definitely spread out. It's not like people focused on Usain Bolt or Michael Phelps. People had a variety of different interests, and also a variety of different countries that they were supporting. So, 9 athletes, it's not like, well, if, all 9 of the United States athletes got 1 million tweets. It was really spread out throughout the world. And another stat that really goes to emphasize that is that the most popular event during the Olympics in terms of tweets generated was actually soccer. So soccer generated more than 5 million tweets, which, goes to show that international users are a huge part of Twitter. I think that that's something that we often forget, is just how popular Twitter is in some of these international countries. And so, you know, when you've got Brazil taking on Mexico in the soccer finals and just generating tons of Twitter mentions, it's not something that you would have thought about. You would have thought, you know, oh, maybe it's Usain Bolt or Michael Phelps, but soccer was actually, you know, the #1 most tweeted event, which I thought was an interesting takeaway from the Olympics.
And some of the interesting things, besides how many times spectators went ahead and tweeted, was the fact that a lot of the athletes, for instance, use this as an opportunity or as a tool to express themselves and show kind of, you know, behind the scenes things of what's happening. So when you take a look at the post that we'll link to, you get to see things like Oscar Pistorius, who was the first, I think it was, they call it double amputee, who had the prosthetic. They're not even prosthetic, but they're special running legs that he ended up running in one of the relays and also one of the sprints, I believe, where he expresses his feelings on Twitter about being supported by the crowd. And even Barack Obama congratulated Michael Phelps for breaking the Olympic medal record. So you get to see a lot of what was going on behind the scenes, and people were using it as a means for expressing their congratulations to other folks. There's congratulations to the athletes, and also showing off things like their gold medals behind the scenes in the locker room and so on, as you'll see on the post here.
There we go. So that's our weekly stat that we wanted to dive into to really set the stage for what we're going to look at now. And so, you know, getting into it, and this was something that we had mentioned previously, just the idea that social media has grown tremendously since just 4 years ago. And there was actually an interesting infographic shared on Fast Company's design blog, and it really, you know, highlighted just how different the world is from 4 years ago. So it looked at some of the larger social networks and compared them. Again, remember, this is 4 years ago, which really isn't that long. You know, in internet terms, I guess it's a pretty good amount of time.
Well, how old is Facebook, right? I mean, Facebook is just over 5 years old or something, going on 6 years old.
Yeah, something like that. And so 4 years ago, Facebook actually had only 1 million users, 100 million users, which, considering the fact that we're now approaching 1 billion users, there are more than 900 million Facebook users. It's gone from 100 million to 900 million in just 4 years. That's incredible. That's 200 million new users per year. YouTube, 4 years ago, there were 133 million views of YouTube videos per day. 133 million. This year, there are now 4 billion YouTube views per day. So it's gone from 133 million to 4 billion. The amount of video views has just jumped off the charts. And then again, returning to Twitter. So 4 years ago, Twitter was just a small little shriveled self of what it is today. It was 6 million people. Today, Twitter numbers in 500 million, so jumped from 6 million to 500 million. It was a totally different Twitter at that point. There were, didn't have a lot of the features that we're used to now. It was really just this emerging network that at the time, 6 million people compared to Facebook's 100 million. Even then it was small. And so it's just interesting to see how big some of these jumps are. And then, taking these numbers 4 years into the future and imagining how big something like a Facebook or how global something like a Twitter is going to be.
Well, take into consideration also what you were talking about regarding the 4 billion. It was previously 133 million views on YouTube to the 4 billion views per day. Now, how many of those were live, right? Because they covered a lot of the events actually live on YouTube. So I would say there's probably a considerable amount because YouTube had partnerships with some of the media folks out there, I believe even with NBC, in order to help cover the event live. And so it would be interesting to find out what percentage of those 4 billion happened to be related to folks who are viewing it live.
Actually, some of those numbers did get shared. So here we go. 159 million total video streams. So that's over the course of the 17 days. And it actually, if you add up all of those video views, it adds up to 20 million hours of streamed video spread out across 159 million total video streams. So still a, relatively small portion because that was, again, 159 million spread out over the 17 days. And YouTube is getting 4 billion views per day. So it's still just a relatively small portion. But 4 years ago it was what, 0 streams? So even 159 million is still a pretty impressive number, considering that that's still a relatively new piece of technology.
Was there, anything here that just you didn't surprise you at all? It just seemed like, or not necessarily didn't surprise you, but was a little bit maybe even disappointing, lower than what you expected.
Not necessarily. I think that the numbers, were very strong. And I think it goes to show that, we think about these things. And for myself, I guess I was just caught off guard, by how big the gap was from just 4 years ago. I try to think back 4 years. I'm like, things were kind of the same. We had Facebook, we had Twitter, we had YouTube, but really the way that we created content for these and the way that we consumed content inside of these channels was different. And it was in response to the number of Twitter users posting content. There wasn't nearly as many, and so it was a little easier to weed through that stream. And Facebook users, we didn't have 1 billion people. It was a much smaller group, and so you could interact with people in a different way than the way you do today. So I think it shows that you really have to remain on top of things and evolve with the channels as they evolve themselves.
And it proved that social media is a viable option right now for folks, and almost a mandatory option for folks to cover major events, even not so major events. You might strongly consider it. It's a part of the way that we do things now, and a part of the way that people expect to consume. It's one thing to say that Facebook and YouTube allowed for these broadcasts. It's another thing to have these numbers that prove that people actually use these channels as a way to interact. It shows that people are used to it, and they've acclimated to using social media as a primary way for interacting with folks. So what's next?
I thought, again, we talked about some of these number of video streams shared, and that was part of some of the data that Google was sharing about just general searches and how much of their network was being used during the Olympics. So much like Twitter, after a big event, they come out and they kind of brag about numbers. Google does the same. They like to talk about how big their network is, their reach, and they talked about some interesting things. The first of which I thought was a huge increase in the number of mobile searches. So I think they highlighted, the shift towards second screen viewing. People that are watching the Olympics on TV and they've got their laptop open, they've got their phone out, they've got a tablet, they're looking for, player names, they're doing what we did and saying, how did this sport come to be? And they're doing that through Google. And I think they said sometimes upwards of 47% of their searches were coming through a mobile platform, which is really impressive. I think that, that's a number that definitely has increased drastically from even just a couple of years ago, and shows that really mobile is something that can't be ignored. It's how people are consuming information. It's how people want to interact with a lot of these channels. If you were, a blog or a website that didn't have a mobile-friendly page and somebody's watching the Olympics and they're like, oh, I want to find out about, Michael Phelps, and you were a brand that had put together the top 10 pins that Michael Phelps might like, and they're like, oh, I'll check that out, and they click it, and they can't view it on their phone, that's a missed opportunity. So you've got to be sure that when somebody finds your content, but they find it on their mobile phone, they're still able to access it, and they're still able to get that full experience.
Well, and that 47% number echoes a study that we talked about probably within 10 episodes back or so, regarding in-time searches on mobile devices and the percentage of folks who are actually using mobile devices to access the internet, and what percentage of those just happen to be searches in general, rather than if they're just in-time information, if they're just searches in general. So this is echoing it here with this number, and I think that's also what's fueled the growth in, say, for instance, Twitter in its usage during the event. Even, for instance, Instagram during the event being used. And then the interesting part is that people didn't rely on their mobile devices only to do sharing of the moment around them, but also to learn more about it based on what Google's talking about here.
Part of that, I guess, leads into this idea of time delays. So there was a lot of commotion, a lot of discussion around the fact that NBC was time delaying a lot of the events that had already happened live. They had already concluded, and they basically shot the footage and then put it in a can and aired it, 8 hours later than it had actually happened in real time. And people were saying, is this right? Are they ruining the experience? People were finding out about the end result before they were even able to watch it on TV. What was your take on that? Do you think that NBC, did the right thing in delaying things because, hey, they've got to get their advertisers happy. They've got to, make the most of the money that they've spent to get the Olympics. Or do you think that they should have just brought it live because, hey, in today's social media world, spoilers are everywhere, and the second something happens, people are talking about it. So you can't just delay it 6 hours and think, oh, that's going to work. Nobody's going to, everybody's going to wait and all watch it together during prime time.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a global world now, right? We're in a place where people are sharing information at the speed of tweets all over the world. And even, for instance, I'd jump in the car and I would hear on the radio, a talk show radio, they'd have a quick news bulletin and then suddenly talk about who won this and who won that, and they hadn't even shown it on NBC yet. So I understand what they were trying to do in the sense of satiating the appetites of their advertisers and such. But there needs to be a different strategy. I'm actually a little bit more perturbed with NBC because of the way that they handled the access to their streaming content and things like that. For instance, with their application and everything, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, I think that they need to really, everybody that's going to cover a global event needs to consider their audience, especially their passionate audience, is going to be willing to be there when that thing is happening, especially if they really care about that particular event. So something like women's soccer, right? So the U.S. won women's soccer, men's basketball, the things that people were watching game after game after game, even volleyball, for instance. It was really annoying to find out that the U.S. had won gold, which of course they would have had to because it was both gold and silver that they were going for at that last round. But then to find out on the radio that they had won and not even be able to have seen the match yet, and then suddenly sit down at 10 or something at night and have that same event played, and you're like, well, I've already seen this. I've never been a person that, I mean, I think there's a few folks out there that have become acclimated to TiVoing their favorite sports event because they couldn't be there, and then completely depriving themselves of any input from radio, from TV, from anything until they're able to watch that game. But I'm not one of those people. I didn't shut everything else off in order to just go there at night and see what was going on. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I thought one of the most interesting stories to come out of this was something that Gizmodo actually talked about, which was NBC basically scooping their own coverage. So, it's one thing to say, oh, well, NBC, they wanted to wait and they wanted to show everything during prime time, but even different divisions within NBC weren't all on the same page. And so NBC, the TV network, was delaying, I believe the story was in reference to the 4x100 relay for swimming. So this was, a pretty big battle between US and France, and they were really hyping this thing up, and they said, stay tuned, we'll show you this race. But then if you went to NBC.com, they had a giant banner on top of the site that said, France upsets US in the 4x100 meter relay. And you're like, well, you can't give the result over here and then hide the result over there. You've got to have one cohesive voice. And I think this is even something that a lot of brands could take as a lesson. You've got to get all parts of your organization on the same page. You can't have PR over here pushing a story and then have your web team thinking that, oh, we're not going to put that story live on our website for 24 hours, and suddenly you've got news breaking, but it's not up on the web. You've got to really coordinate all elements of a company to come together and tell the story in the strongest way possible. So I thought it was interesting that even NBC, with all their dollars and all their resources, was still struggling to keep everybody, aligned and on the same page as to when they were going to actually release some of these news stories. I
think in the Winter Olympics, we might see them handling things a bit differently. And definitely 4 years from now over at Rio de Janeiro, I think we'll see things covered a bit differently. NBC kind of screwed the pooch in a whole bunch of different ways. We also have a story regarding how NBC is blaming the poor quality of their streaming on their applications that they've released. If you're not familiar with it out there, they had an application on pretty much any platform to allow you to watch any event that you wanted to live as it was happening, and then a bunch of clips and so on. But a lot of folks were up in arms very early on about, well, two things. One, which I wasn't quite happy about, was that you had to have some sort of cable subscription someplace. NBC being owned by Comcast, who you would have thunk. But they were talking about pretty much. I mean, they had a whole slew of cable providers and said, if you have an account, go ahead and log in, and we'll give you access. Well, there were a lot of cable cutters, right, that do not have cable subscriptions anymore. They use the internet as their primary way of watching TV that they want to watch on Hulu or watching movies on Netflix. And so this is almost as a way for Comcast and NBC to kind of get back at those who cut their cords. But the applications themselves early on, and I think they were constantly kind of pushing out new versions trying to fix the issue, but they blamed folks on the poor quality that people were experiencing, and saying that it was their devices and that it was also their connections, which is a convenient thing to blame on, especially if you happen to have Comcast as part of your connections. If you're using Comcast as your broadband provider. So in any case, again, I think they were gutsy in doing what they did. They didn't execute things 100% correctly, but this was really the first year that in our history that we've ever had the Olympics that were this social and that were this technologically driven. And so I anticipate, again, in the Winter Olympics and in Rio de Janeiro, that things will be quite different in regards to how people can cover the Olympics and watch the Olympics both real time, so when it's actually happening, and using their devices of choice. And as you explained earlier with the Twitter story, the Google story, that there was a lot of this second screen usage, right? Where people were watching TV, they were searching with their mobile devices, or they were watching on TV or even at work, and they were using their mobile devices to cover some other sport that they were watching as well. Because in most cases, NBC wasn't covering all the sports you wanted. They were only covering, at least in our country, US only, and then they were covering what they deemed to be the most important. Where the great thing about their application is that if you could get access, you were able to watch any event that you wanted to that was happening live. So you could watch, I think we ended up watching fencing. My wife and I ended up watching fencing on my computer, and I don't remember ever watching fencing, but it was really awesome to watch it. And it was because they gave us a little day pass. But beyond that, they locked it down and we couldn't watch anything anymore because we didn't have, an Xfinity pass.
Yeah, and, thinking a little bit metaphorically again about some of these challenges, I think it's interesting that NBC blames, essentially the technology that's out there for the quality of the streaming. And I don't necessarily doubt that. I have a relatively fast computer, I have a relatively fast connection, and a lot of times, even myself, I'm seeing the internet kind of struggle to play this streaming content. And so I think what a lot of brands should keep in mind is a lot of times the technology still hasn't caught up to this ideal scenario or what you have in your mind. NBC was really thinking, oh, we'll just stream all these shows and everybody will watch it and it'll be this utopia where, oh, we're all watching content wherever we want. We can watch it on our tablet, we can watch it on our computer, we can watch it on our Xfinity TV. But realistically, that wasn't the case. And so, I think it helps to have a backup plan. What is your options if the streaming doesn't work? If, people are writing in and saying, oh, I'm trying, but I just can't get a good quality stream. Are there other things that you can do? Is it, we're going to live tweet the events. We're going to, create a live blog and post pictures and try to bring the story to life in other ways. Because I've seen this a lot where, we're going to have a stream of something and then you try to log into that and it just doesn't work. And so I think having a backup plan in place definitely makes a lot of sense as we're transitioning into some of these new technologies that, hey, if it works perfectly, that's great. But a lot of times it isn't going to work perfectly and you still need to be prepared to make that story that you're trying to get across come to life.
So we talked a lot so far about the athletes and the events being the stars, but there was another star, or at least a lot of the folks out there would like to be the stars, and those were the sponsors, right, Corey?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, it's no secret that it costs a lot to be an official sponsor of the Olympics. They police this thing incredibly well. They've got these like roaming teams of brand police basically like roaming around London and making sure that only the official sponsors are able to get their brand out there. And I think it was one of the funny stories that came out. I believe we even talked about this on the show, was that McDonald's was the official French fry sponsor of the Olympics. And so London is kind of well known for having fish and chips. And chips is, just another word for French fries. And so there was this story that came out that they were actually banning restaurants from selling chips. But the way around it is that they could sell fish and chips. So if you went into a restaurant and you just wanted an order of fries, you had to also get some fish with that in order to comply with this crazy kind of Olympic sponsorship regulations. But one brand that actually figured out a way around that and got a little creative were these headphone companies. And I think both Beats by Dre and the Soul company, which I think is the Ludacris company, very similar to Beats by Dre, actually gave their headphones to the athletes. And so a lot of athletes, when they're getting ready for their sport, they like to play the music, they're getting pumped up. And so they would show these cutaway shots of these athletes, getting ready for their event, and they've got these giant bright headphones on with the Beats by Dre logo like plastered across the side. And they're pretty distinctive headphones on their own. So just seeing them, you kind of recognize, oh, those are those Beats by Dre headphones. And suddenly you're seeing a whole bunch of athletes at the Olympics listening to these headphones. And for a lot of people, they're probably thinking to themselves, oh, maybe those headphones are good. Maybe the next time I'm in Best Buy, I should check those out. Or the next time I'm shopping for a new set of headphones, I should consider that because, hey, that's what Michael Phelps listens to, or that's what all these other athletes listen to. And, there were apparently some of the official sponsors came in and said, hey, what the heck? How did they get all this TV exposure? But it was just smart marketing. They saw an opportunity. The cost to send these customized headphones to all these athletes is probably extremely minimal for the amount of coverage they got. So I think it was a smart move on their behalf. And, I'm guessing that loophole gets closed by the next Olympics. But hey, for this one, it worked well, and they got a ton of coverage out of it.
They even made some, I think it was the Beats by Dre company ended up making one with the Union Jack on the side. Mm-hmm. And so they had those that they gave out to the British athletes. And in the past, they had the little earbuds, and this year it just seemed like everybody had the full size headphones with the big logo on the side, and not sure how they slipped by. But the lesson here is sometimes you can find these loopholes, and just by having the right product placement, especially in this day and age where it's more than just TV, where people are going to potentially see this, right? When folks are taking photos of it, and people in the crowd are snapping shots and sharing it via social media. You get a little bit extra attraction in that sense, and maybe even discussion around things. I'd be interested to find out what people might have said about the headphones themselves on the social web, rather than just simply the athletes. How many mentions are there where somebody is saying what headphones are those athletes wearing, or something like that? Would be an interesting thing to do some research on.
Yeah, and you might not be able to stick your headphones or your brand on a Olympic athlete, but still, take this idea and run with it. Maybe there is a race in your town or a marathon or something, and you can go and cheer people on, but you've got a giant sign that's got your brand logo on it, and that starts to make it in photos that appear in newspapers. Or, maybe you can sponsor things like local events. If you're a local company, you could provide dinner for the actors in a play, or, sponsor a spaghetti cook-off for a local high school team. Get creative with it and think about, okay, well, that worked well for Beats by Dre. What's my version of, going around what people normally associate with product placement and just getting creative with that? I think that's an opportunity that other brands could learn from.
So Corey is borderline saying photobomb at every opportunity. No, I'm just kidding. Actually,
if it works, if it gets your brand out there, you got to do what you got to do sometimes.
Well, it reminded me, the whole photobomb thing was reminding me of the big meme that was going around with what's her name, Michaela Maroney, where she, I think, got silver, and she's one of the gymnasts, the best vaulter they call it in the world. And she just kind of was sitting there and, biting the inside of her lip and having this kind of funny smirk on her face. And somebody snapped the photo, and they they kept calling it Michaela is not impressed. And so there's Tumblr blogs all over the place where they're taking this one photo and they're cropping her out of it and placing her in all these different situations where they're saying Michaela is not impressed, and it shows like the Mars rover, photos that they announced a couple of weeks ago, and they have her sitting on Mars, like Michaela is not impressed. So anyways, that's also another thing you should check out in regard to the way that memes have taken off based off the Olympics.
Yeah, another interesting trend that emerged was athletes actually communicating directly with their fans through social media. So just to highlight two of those, one was LeBron James, and he was actually mentioned in a blog post that Clout put out. Clout looked at the top influencers of the Olympics, and of course they're going to say, these are the most influential athletes, and here's how they became so influential. But LeBron James was a great example of what to do well. He was at the Olympics tweeting photos of teammates, tweeting photos of dinner, tweeting photos of, tourist traps that he was going to. And there was even an athlete who participated in the track and field high jump that looked like, I believe it was Kobe Bryant, I want to say. He looked like one of the basketball players. And so he, posed next to this guy, and he's like, oh, you think it's this guy, but it's not. It's this high jumper. So just had a lot of fun with it, but provided a lot of great behind-the-scenes content. And that's what makes him so influential. He's not just, these are posed press photos that I'm sharing. He's giving you a look behind the scenes. He's, making himself very real and approachable, and as such, people respond to that. They like communicating with brands and with people that they feel like when they send a message or when they hear a message from this person, it's real and it's not filtered through a legal team and a PR team until it's, finely tuned. They just want the raw feed, and I think there's a lot to learn from the response that LeBron James sees from those actions.
And I think it's more about guiding both that individual and in the case of these athletes and the brand on kind of just general guidelines on how they should behave on their own. So that way they can be authentic and they can understand for those that might not be professionally trained, they can understand what they need to be careful, what the sorts of things they should stay away from mentioning or doing. But beyond that, allow them to be authentically themselves. So it goes back to the kind of the philosophy that it's really about setting guidelines about the few things that you just don't want to have released. And those things are far fewer than the things that you should allow folks to express and to share about a brand. And so that's what some of these athletes were doing. There were a couple athletes, though, that were really screwing up big time. And those athletes were ones that were attempting to use Twitter to express themselves and should have actually kept their mouths shut, right?
That's true. So before we get to that, let me start out with one athlete that did it right, and then we'll contrast that with the athletes that do it wrong. So
all right.
The one that did get Twitter right, and I thought this was really interesting, was U.S. swimmer Scott Tyler Clary. So he actually ended up winning a gold medal in his swimming race, but what was interesting is, due to the NBC tape delay, he was able to live tweet his own race. And so he hopped on Twitter, and when his race was airing on NBC, he was on Twitter talking about himself. And so he was talking about things like, they would do a cutaway to him, again, listening to these Beats by Dre headphones, and he's like, oh, I'm listening to The Motto by Drake. He's giving you insight into the song that he listens to get you pumped up, and saying things like, oh, in this scene, this is where I'm really just in the zone. I'm completely focused. I'm relaxed. I'm prepared to go. I just want to get this thing over with. And then, he says, oh, I see that I'm behind at the 100, but I'm only thinking about building into the last 25. He's really just bringing you into his mindset. He's sharing that. Again, he's keeping it, very real, very unfiltered. And because of that, people feel like, oh, I relate to this guy. I can understand where he's coming from. And that just helps build his own personal brand. So I thought that was an example of somebody that used Twitter to do it right. And there were plenty of athletes, unfortunately, that showed how to do it wrong. So the first one that came out, this was before the Olympics even happened. A Greek athlete.
Let's see you pronounce the name.
Not even gonna try it.
Paraskevi Paparizou. What the heck? That's
the
a
last
Greek
name's
name?
tough. I think I'll give you the first name. Paraskevi. So anyways, Paraskevi is a Greek track and field athlete. And she actually posted a tweet that had a lot of, potentially racist connotations to it. I won't mention it on the show. You can go ahead and, find the link in the show notes. You can click through and see what she said. But she was actually kicked off of the Greek Olympic team before the Olympics even started for this tweet. The Olympics, it's all about representing your country. It's about national pride. And so to say something that was basically just, outright racist, the Greece team said, well, we don't want that to represent our country. Unfortunately, you're no longer on our Olympic team. And so, she's been training for, I'd imagine, 4 years for this moment. And in a flash, one poorly timed, poorly thought out tweet basically erased her Olympic, goals and aspirations. And I think we've seen that with companies as well. You put a lot of work into building up a campaign and building up your brand and really putting a lot of effort into it. But then one stupid tweet and suddenly the entire social world is turned against you, and for good reason.
Was that Celeb Boutique during the Aurora shooting?
Celeb Boutique, I think it's going to take them quite a long time to live that one down, and that was just not doing the research on what a trending topic was. And so I think that there's a lot to be said for understanding things, taking an extra second to think about what you're saying. Don't just be quick to the gun, because being 1 second late with a properly thought out tweet is much better than being 1 second early with something that hasn't been all the way thought through and could potentially have your audience and your fans backlash against you. So
that's a good motto there. I think that should be like a plaque, like think before you tweet. 1 second. That's pretty good there, Corey.
There we go. So 1 second, all the difference. Think before you tweet. And then there was actually a second Olympian who was kicked out of the games again for tweeting. I don't know what was wrong with these people. They got caught up in the moment of the Olympics, I guess. But it was, another athlete from Greece, actually. It was their triple jumper.
Maybe we can blame this on a bad translation on Google Translate is what it is.
Yeah, there we go.
Because they said it in Greek, and maybe they put it into Google Translate, and for some reason Google just automatically made it sound offensive.
Yeah, the second was actually, I'm sorry, it was a French soccer player who, after getting beaten by the Korean team, got a little upset and was calling out the Korean players, using a lot of derogatory terms, and because of that was kicked off the Olympic team. And again, for good reason. If you're going to say things like this, you don't deserve to represent your country in something like the Olympics. And so I think it just goes to show that, people are still getting comfortable with the fact that everything you say is public. Everything you say is out and easy to search and easy to see and easy to represents
you, right? It represents your brand and your team and your country.
Exactly. You're not just, this single athlete. You represent something much greater. And for, brands, if you're out there representing your brand on Twitter or on Facebook, you're not just a single employee. You represent much more than that. And so you have to oftentimes keep your own feelings to yourself. You have to think about what would the brand or what would the business say, not just what is my own feeling on this situation. So, two athletes that unfortunately had to pay the ultimate price. They had to get kicked off of their Olympic team, but hopefully it's a lesson learned for all of us to, like Adam said, think before you tweet.
That was you. That was your wisdom, actually, not mine.
All right. Well, like Adam summarized. There we go. I'll give you credit for the good summary.
So what do we have here next as we get to our final leg of our podcast? You like those sports metaphors there?
I do. That's very good. We'll tie that in with our gold medal episode title. I don't know. It's tough to figure out what we want to end this with. Maybe we'll end it with one more example of athletes that just didn't quite get it, but hopefully turn this into, again, a lesson that can be learned by brands and applied to situations outside of this, specific Olympic event.
This is a little bit less on the winning side and more on the whining side, right?
Less on the winning, more on the whining. So there was a Olympic athlete who was competing in swimming. What was the name?
Seebohm.
Emily Seebohm. There we go. So Emily Seebohm, who was a swimmer, essentially favored to win her event. She, by all accounts, was going to win. She had qualified well. She was posting good times. And so after the qualification, people took to Twitter and were congratulating her and were saying, hey, you're looking great out there. This one's in the bag. You've got the gold. It's going to be awesome to celebrate with you. And she started to fall for her own hype. And so instead of, staying in the zone and staying focused, she was on Twitter. She was saying, oh, thanks. I appreciate you being my fan. And she was engaging with these people and lost focus of actually swimming in and winning her event. And so she ended up not getting gold. And so afterwards they were talking about it. They're like, you were favored to win this race. What happened? And she said, well, I blame Twitter. I think that I sort of fell for my own hype and I got caught up in thinking that I already had it in the bag when really, it's not over till it's over. And so I thought this was interesting. And again, moving this more into the metaphoric, because I don't want to just talk about, very specific stories to the Olympics. I think that idea of don't fall for your own hype is important. And especially in this world of social media where a lot of times companies get so fixated on numbers. And so there's this danger that, hey, as soon as you get to a specific threshold, you can kick back and take it easy. You see these brands and they go on these huge spikes and suddenly you've got 100,000 fans and, you're living life in the fast lane and everything you post is getting retweeted and getting favorited and getting commented on. But if you fall asleep at the wheel, that could all turn against you. You have to continue to keep working at it. You have to continue to provide value. You have to stay focused, because just getting the numbers and just getting the momentum doesn't get you the gold medal. You've got to put the work in. You've got to continue through all the way to the end. And so I think it's interesting. I don't have a good example for this from brands, but I know that, it's out there. You see companies do this where when they're small, they're scrappy, they're thinking of interesting things, they're finding ways of giving back, they're really engaging. And then when their community grows and suddenly they've got a much bigger fan base, you kind of feel like, well, hey, did they forget about me? They're not responding to things as well. They're not replying as quickly. They're not giving back to their community by retweeting things and favoriting things. They're sort of extracting value, and you lose this equal exchange. And it's like, well, I've got these numbers. I'm just going to use that to my advantage, when really that's the time to double down and say, I'm just going to work even harder. I'm going to provide even more value and help get to that next plateau.
The follow through and execution ultimately is always in your hands, not in the hands of your 10 or 10,000 or 10 million Twitter followers or Facebook fans or whatever the case is. The follow through and execution is always going to be on you as a brand, whether that be a personal or professional brand, to see it through to the end. So I think hype is really a good term for it, as you mentioned before. Don't believe the hype.
All right, well, that's quite a bit of Olympic news. So what do you say we dive into a tool review that is still Olympic related, but talks a little bit about a tool that some of the listeners might be interested in checking out as well?
Yeah, sure thing. I happen to love me some Storify. Have you ever used Storify before, Corey?
I've read through some of the Storify stories. I haven't actually created one myself, but I've, oddly enough, watched somebody create one, and so I'm familiar with it, though. I'd love to hear your take on it and why you are such a big fan of the service.
Yeah, I think it's pretty awesome. So just to give you a quick synopsis in how Storify is related to the Olympics. Well, actually, let me explain to you the mechanics behind Storify first. So Storify is an online tool that allows you to kind of cull through all different sources on the web, including many of the social network sources such as Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus and SlideShare and Flickr and Instagram, and actually pick and pull different pieces out of those social conversations and other sources online and create your own story. So essentially, it's like a curation tool that allows you to put these different elements into whatever order that you want, to add your own commentary in between it, and then actually embed that into, say, a website, for instance, and to share it with others and to have people comment it. And so it can always be living to an extent, where some people use it where they start off kind of almost in a way live blogging the story by picking and pulling the social content. And as the story is kind of developing and happening, they refine that story. And once they've embedded it into a web page, every time somebody comes back, whatever the updated version of that story will reflect to those folks. So it's a great tool for everything from kind of covering what people in general have discussed around maybe an event that you were a part of or that you yourself hosted. If you are, there are a lot of media properties online and news outlets and even local organizations use Storify to cover a lot of different things that are happening in order to integrate discussions and tweets and things from everybody that's out there. So it's an awesome way of integrating content from the general public into your stories that you're creating and then share it online. And so Storify actually put some information up there on their blog to give an idea of how many folks were actually using Storify as a way to share things that were happening around the Olympics. And so they said that there were 2,255 stories that were Olympic related, and they were read 5.2 million times, which is pretty awesome.
Impressive numbers.
It is impressive numbers. And that there was a total of 122,500 media elements, meaning that individual pieces taken from different sources out there. So there were over almost 74,000 quotes. There were 31,000 or so images. There was 11,000, 12,000 text entries, a little over 5,000 links to websites, and 1,400 videos. So when you talk about things like quotes, for instance, those quotes are likely taken from Twitter. Okay. And when you talk about videos, those videos can be taken from any video source. So primarily likely going to be taken from YouTube, where people have posted their own YouTube videos up there, and then people have crafted together their stories from those. And the images seem to be, previously Storify didn't support, and this was some time ago, they didn't support Instagram, but since they supported Instagram, Instagram has become, because of its kind of real-time mobile element, has become the favorite of choice for images for folks trying to grab really awesome snapshots and in-the-moment captures from folks who are attending these events. So at any rate, Storify is a really awesome tool that I think you should check out. If you take a look at some of the stories they have, and we're linking to the Olympic-related stories on Storify, because not only can you embed them onto your website, but you can also go to storify.com and actually do a search for events related to it or stories that were created by people related to specific terms. You'll actually see that there's everything from media outlets around the world all the way down to the universities that were covering the athletes that they, were supporting in their particular communities, and kind of covering their road to the Olympics and then how they did at the Olympics ultimately. So Storify is a tool that I think that everybody should check out. I think it's a really incredible way to take advantage of content you yourself produce, but even more importantly, all the content that other people are producing around a particular story or a particular brand. So you're leveraging that social discussion and content's being generated by others, and also the social proof of what's being said, not only by you, because it's easy to spout off how cool you are and to create a story based on your point of view, but when you can include the richness of the voice and content of others, it really adds a certain depth and, like I said, richness to the story that goes beyond any just standard blog post that you could go ahead and write. So I do recommend that folks check it out. It's a free service, and start integrating it into things like your blogs, for instance, or think about an event that you have coming up yourself, whether it be a conference that you're attending as maybe a sponsor, and so you have some behind the scenes stuff and you want to really kind of support that event, or maybe you yourself are putting on a conference yourself, or think about some sort of industry event that you'd like to cover, or even put together. Maybe you've just released a new feature on a product or a service that you have, and you want to actually pull together the reactions from folks. There's so many different ways to use this if you're creative. As we say, always be experimenting. So check it out and experiment with some ways to use Storify to create some stories for yourself with the social media content.
Yeah, good summary. I'm a big fan of Storify. I feel like it is almost an undiscovered gem right now. There aren't a lot of brands that are using it, but when big brands like NBC and the Wall Street Journal are putting their weight behind it, you know that it's tested, you know that it works. And hey, the results speak for themselves. 2,200 stories generated 5.2 million views. That's a lot of response to this. It's a lot of potential out there. So jump on it, see what you can do.
They have an awesome iPad app that was released, I think, within the last 5 or 6 months, that really does a great job of allowing you to do a lot of this curation directly from, your tablet as well. So Good tools, like you said. It's been tested and proven by some great media resources. So check it out.
All right. Well, iPad app is a perfect summary or a perfect segue into our lightning round.
Lightning round.
So, Adam, I've got 60 seconds on the clock. Why don't you start us off with Pinterest changes, including open registration and tablet apps? Ready and go.
Yep. So Pinterest, within the last couple of weeks, has now opened the floodgates for anybody who wants to register and get an account. Previously, you had to get an invitation from somebody, and I almost forgot that was still the case because so many people seem to have been able to get invitations so quickly. So they just kind of open it up and they let everybody in. So let's see how that affects the growth of that network, which was seeing a huge spike. And then secondly, today, literally an hour before our show, Pinterest upgraded their iOS application to be universal, which means that it will work as an iPad app for the iPad and as an iPhone app for the iPhone. And so check out the new iPad app that's optimized for the larger form factor. I played around with it just a little bit, and it is definitely much easier to use than their website on the tablet, which without actually changing it too much from what you're used to on their website. 5 seconds left. Your turn.
5 seconds to go. I will put a pause on that one and start a fresh 60 seconds. Ready and go. So, two things. I think that one, the open registration isn't going to do that much. Like you said, most people that wanted one were able to find an invitation. Pinterest wasn't stingy. If you had an account, you were able to pretty easily invite a number of other people. I don't think that that's going to do much for them. However, I think that these tablet apps are going to do a lot to help grow the network. One thing that you didn't include is the fact that in addition to iOS tablet apps, they also released an Android tablet app. So for the new, Google tablet that's out there, for the Amazon tablet, you can now browse Pinterest on those as well. So they're really focused on mobile, which is, I think, the direction that they need to go. I was waiting for this because I was a little disappointed that it took them so long to have a strong presence in mobile, but the type of content and the way that you interact with that site lends itself really well to mobile and especially a tablet experience. So I think we're going to see a nice spike in usage, which should help bring in new users as people want to share in that content. All right, just in time.
By the skin of your teeth, by the skin of your teeth.
Sneaked in there. All right, so I'm going to put 60 seconds back on the clock and kick us over to our next story. So this is I don't even know what to call it, a gadget, a service called Face Deals. And it was actually created by an agency, interestingly enough, called Red Pepper. So Face Deals is basically a fun little hack that you can attach to the front of a building, and it allows people to check into that building using their face. And as the name implies, you can then use that check-in to get deals. And so it was a clever bit of hacking. It basically used a bunch of existing technology but put it together in a fun way. Of course, to participate in this, you have to authorize it, so it's not like it's just scanning people and doing a bunch of creepy stuff with that data. It's more a way of saying, hey, if you're stopping in here all the time, let's have a little fun with this together. Just walk in the door, we'll recognize you, we'll check you in automatically, and in exchange, we'll give you deals. Again, I think that exchange of value is key. If somebody is going to give you the value of allowing you to check in for them, you as a brand need to give some value back and give deals, give offers, give incentives. All right, Adam, what's your take on Face Deals? Ready and go.
I've always wanted to, use my face for something special. And so it's really interesting what they're doing there. I think we've seen a number of these things where they're in a way transcending just people using their standard digital devices to do things like check in, to interact with Twitter, for instance, with some of these little devices that were, spitting out a piece of candy or a gumball for somebody if they tweeted and so on. So I think it's always cool when somebody, again, experiments in this fashion. And I don't know if we're going to see facial recognition make it to the mainstream out anytime soon, but it's kind of an interesting concept. I mean, I think just experiment. There's some fun things that you could do to play around and get some press. As an agency, I'm sure they were doing this in order to get some recognition and some press for being extra creative with Facebook and checking in.
All right, 5 seconds to go yet again, Adam. You are well within your allotted time. Congratulations.
I'm under the Olympic record for doing lightning round.
You're going for the lightning round gold. All right, so 60 seconds back on the clock. I will close out the lightning round with our last story of the day. So this is Oreo's Daily Twist. This is actually an extension of something that we covered in the past. So previously, Oreo had put out a remix of their Oreo for Pride Day. It was the multicolored Oreo. And they again hit the PR gold with a custom Oreo that they put out when NASA landed another lunar rover on Mars. They actually created a little red Oreo. It had tire tracks, and people ate it up. And it turns out they've been doing one of those every single day. They call it the Daily Twist. It's just a remix of their Oreo. They crush them. They do fun things with the icing. They add things to it. I think it's really clever. But what's interesting is, you've only heard about the big ones that get the big press, the Pride Day and the the Mars landing, but they're doing this every single day. Not everyone is a hit, but some are, and you just have to keep at it because you can't get discouraged when, the first one we put out doesn't go national. Eventually it'll happen if you put the work into it. All right, I went slightly over, but I'm taking some of your bonus seconds, Adam. So 60 seconds on the clock. What's your take on Oreo's Daily Twist? Do you think this is smart and a good opportunity to interact with some of the national events? Ready, go.
Yeah, I think this is an awesome way to kind of personify your brand and images. I think you were almost alluding to it a little bit, Corey, when you said some of them are hits and some of them aren't. And I've only seen a couple of them come through my Facebook stream as people were sharing, and those happened to be the hits. And so the Mars lander was one of them. I think that was a really genius way of taking Oreos and tying it to that really big historical event. And as I'm looking through the site here, I didn't realize just how many other ones they have. But they really do have one for every single day with a completely different theme. And so how can you personify your brand and attach it to things that are happening, both event-based, historical events, to everything from National Elvis Week and Shark Week, even for Discovery Channel. And they made the website really, really simple. They just put the image, they allowed you to like it and to tweet it. And in fact, they should add Pinterest here. But I think this is really incredible. There's nothing wrong at all about it. It's pretty smart.
All right, I'll let the buzzer go off just because I want to hear it once for one.
I know. I feel like I have to leave a little pause in there because if I end up going over, I'll get slimed like on Nickelodeon or something like that.
That would be awesome. If we get a couple extra sponsors on the show, I might have a little slime bucket mounted over your head for.
I'll do it, man. Round. I'll do it. All
right. Well, one more quick action item. We started this last week with an action item of the week, and I think we should continue it because it's something easy to do. And for this week, what we're going to recommend is to go check out the changes that Klout has made. So, again, a story that essentially broke a couple of hours ago, but Klout has relaunched their entire website. They're in the process of relaunching their Klout score. They're in the process of relaunching their Klout website, the way that you can view your score, the way that you can understand it. So the action item for this week is to go to Klout.com and check out your new score because likely it'll change. Mine actually changed more than 10 points in a single day. So as a result of this new algorithm, Klout has, really shifted the types of content that they're bringing in and how they're weighting that content. So I think, whether you're a firm believer in Klout or not, it's at least important to understand. I think that they're taking some interesting steps in the right direction. They're responding to some of the criticism of their network. So we're going to include a couple links to check out in the show notes. So click on those, check it out, understand this new Klout score because it's going to take a couple weeks for this to roll out. So you might as well get ahead of the curve and, at least get a sneak peek as to what happened to your Klout score in the last 24 hours.
And they're trying to be much more transparent based on a video that they show of how, and some of the articles that are out there that talk about what's going into this new one. And so with that said, the mystery that was there before about your Klout score, I think will be a little bit more apparent, and they're including a number of other data points and so on. So it may or may not mean much to you. That's still a debatable thing in regards to whether Klout means anything to you as both a brand and as an individual person. But I think it's definitely something to take a look at again because of this not completely new, but the significant refresh that Klout is having.
Yes, indeed. So we covered a lot today, but as always, we'd love to hear from our audience. If you have questions, suggested topics, feedback, or even if you want to just say hi, we really encourage you to get in touch. We love to hear from the audience and we love to interact. There's a number of ways you can do that, but probably the quickest is through Twitter. You can reach the show, which is both Adam and myself. It's at Solo Mo Show. If you'd like to reach myself directly, I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. And you can also reach us via email. Both Corey and I check that email address from time to time. And that email address is solomoshow@gmail.com. We are, of course, a social show, so therefore we are on the social media channels that you guys are on as well. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook page there where we post our episodes. We kind of post other questions and news and things like that that we find from time to time. And we want to, if that's a place where you want to let us know what you think or interact with us, we'd love to have you there. Also, we are on Google+, and we have a shared board between Corey and I on Pinterest where we share the Solo Mo Show episodes, and you can go ahead and repin to your heart's content and share with other folks.
There we go, and we highly encourage you to check out the show notes, which are available at solomoshow.com. We talk about a lot of things every single week, but we make sure to include links to each one of those things in the show notes so that you can click through, dive a little deeper, read about those stories, form your own opinions, and hey, if you read something and you say, you know what, I disagree, I don't think that the points that Adam and Corey were talking about or what I thought was the focus, hey, reach out and share that feedback with us. That's what the show notes are there for. We highly encourage you to check those out. So those, again, are available at solomoshow.com or in your podcast player of choice. And, the show notes are our way of providing value to you. If we asked for one way for you to provide value to us, it would be by rating us inside of iTunes. And iTunes rating is incredibly valuable to the show. It helps us build the audience. It helps us establish this show as a credible podcast. And especially with things like the new Apple podcast application ranking shows by their rating inside of iTunes, it helps it get discovered. And so, even just a minute to search for the show on iTunes and give it a quick star rating and give it a quick description would be greatly appreciated, because we put a lot of work into the show and, make that one small request that you help us spread the word by rating it inside of iTunes.
Give us a gold medal on iTunes. That's what we're asking for.
There we go. Rounding it out with a metaphor. I like it. All right, and with that, we will call this episode a wrap, and hopefully you come back next week for another great episode of The Solo Mo Show. We look forward to sharing knowledge with you and hopefully bringing a little bit of interesting stories into your weekly marketing mix.
Take care.